G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a brilliant start to your week. Happy Monday. Now today, as always, of course, what do I always say? We always have a lot to go over. So, of course, we're going to look at the maps. We're going to see where things are shifting as an area has now come under complete control as well. But on the maps, we need to then look at fortifications and new fortifications that are being built and how this will affect Russia's offensive. We also need to look at some strikes by Iskanders as well as other glide bombs as well, which paints then a very different image. And I want to then talk about attritional warfare. But I do want to say something just as we're in, well, I guess the first third of October, which I can't believe that we are saying. But I think over the next month, we will really see Russia go balls to wall to try and make the situation in Ukraine look as dire as possible heading into the US elections. And of course, on the flip side of this, Ukraine's going to go to balls to wall to try and make it look the other way, if that makes sense. As if there is any forced some level of negotiation before this, of course, Ukraine wants Russia to come to the table on their terms and Ukraine in the strongest possible position. Well, Russia will want the exact opposite of this. So like I said a few months ago, I believe we will see the strongest amount of pushing in then the months leading up to this. And I wouldn't be surprised if right now we do see a hell of a lot of pushing. But I want to talk about new strategies, and I want to talk about FABs and winter and stagnant front lines and attritional war. Now, this has come out here from the New York Times today. We're not going to go through the full article, but I'm sure you can find it if you'd like. Ukraine's Donbas strategy: retreat slowly and maximize Russia's losses. You and I have spoken about this at length, about that this is a level of attritional warfare doctrine as well. We spoke about this up around Volchansk, that should there be some withdrawal, you get the Russians in, you can overextend them, they need a lot of troops in there, and then you have a lot of problems. And I actually think in the opposite of that, that is what I believe Russia's doing up in the Kursk region to a degree as well. At least lengthening that, broadening the amount of troops that you need in there. But I don't believe that it is clear that Ukraine is actively doing this. And I'm going to give the reasons for this. Firstly, we've seen absolute holding on to the last minute of many areas, from Avdiivka to Orikhiv to Vuhledar to Robotne to Bakhmut. We've seen last minute and often actually too late soldiers getting left behind. And then the retreat back of where, if you're, retreating slowly, retreating from better positions to at best subpar positions, if not significantly worse. It's not like your traditional fallback in-depth fortification, where you've better fortification, and grinding down. That's why I don't think that this is super clear. But here we have some concerns. I should have written considerations. So number one is that you are losing ground. By doing this, you are losing ground. The enemy is then occupying more territory. Now, what you need to think in this is, if we're actively losing ground, well, what is the possibility to retake this in the future? What is the reality of running offensive ops to then clear more territory too? What is the optics from our partner nations? If we're grinding rearwards, not everyone is some military analyst. What they see is who's making ground here is winning and or losing. How's the optics from partner states and the voters in those democratic countries that, of course, will influence the government to give aid or not to Ukraine, or in the US, maybe force to sign a deal? Now, number two I see is morale. And given the constant withdrawal, that constant fallback, we do know that there is low morale. That's not easy being ground rearwards, even if it's part of some bigger game. And on the flip side of this, that the Russian forces, from what I've seen, especially if we look at videos that came out, Vuhledar and areas, Pokrovsk, there's an increase in morale because you've got this forward momentum. Now, not only does it affect how people will fight on the front line, but it also has a huge effect on recruitment and the civilian population as well, absolutely massively. Number three, is Russia actually able to maintain the pace and the replacement of man and machine? What this is sort of assuming, and I'm going to look at other things here too, is there's a lot of assumption that Russia can't meet replacement and can't maintain this pace. And I don't believe that is as clear as people would like to cut it, given working off numbers released that I would ask some questions about the legitimacy of those numbers or even how they were gotten. So, but it is assuming that Russia can't maintain this. And if they can maintain it, well, that's your possibility to retake these fortified areas in the future, like Vuhledar, incredibly and proven to be incredibly defensible. As you can see, it held for a couple of years against Russian onslaught. Now, number 4, are you yourself then meeting sustainable losses and mobilisation? So is your mobilisation, your recruitment meeting those losses? Is this sustainable? And not just one-to-one, because that's just for defence. And at currently one-to-one, Ukraine's still moving, if we assume one-to-one, is still moving rearwards, but the ability to meet the target set in point number 1, which is offensive operations. So not only to meet your losses, not only do you have to meet that loss, you have to go well over that if you then plan in the future to actually then retake this territory. So there's an assumption that Russia will burn out and an assumption that you're going to well over that and meet an offensive capability and then push forwards as well. Number 5, this war is not who will be victorious, at least militarily, but who will break first. So who will give in first and break, whether it is a collapse of troop numbers, collapse of a front line, or domestic decisions going, we need to end this war, this is done, people pulling up, whether it is domestic in Western states being like, we need to end the war in Ukraine, we're voting X into power, or whether it is in Russia going, we're sick of this war, or Ukrainians themselves going, we're sick of this, let's find another way out. The decision will ultimately be made by the people. But at this point in time, it's not clear to me that either side has the military might to achieve some of the goals absolutely set. So it is relying on more of a failure of the other side. Now, some people will disagree with my opinion. My opinion is that Russia is winning the attritional war, and this retreat slowly, I don't believe Ukraine is meeting, even if they are retreating slowly, are they meeting the recruitment, the mobilisation to ever actually return that territory in offensive operations? And I do believe that Russia is at least very close to, if not, then meeting its replacement rate of forces currently with the recruitment that we see. The reason I say that is, for years now, we have heard about another mobilisation within Russia, and it has not come. And as far as the shell use, we are seeing that improve. So I undoubtedly think that Russia is winning the attritional war. When we look at, and these are what I've given out, population versus the losses. Larger population can then incur larger losses. The current recruitment seems to be very high. The ability to actually mobilise. The Russia can mobilise, and like we showed you yesterday from, the CIT, but the intelligence guys, was they will very likely be able to sustain another 300,000 if they choose to mobilise that. The shell use and production, well, we hear time and time again that it's 10-1 on the battlefield. The FAB, which is incredibly important, even if you're pulling back and these are going 20, 30 Ks behind the line, still can cause chaos. Biggest one I believe in here is probably the fortifications. Russia has the Surovikin line. It's proven to have worked, and those fortifications are very strong. That even if then they go, we can't sustain offensive operations anymore, Ukraine then swing onto the offensive. At what level of numerical forces overmatch you're going to have to actually be able to ever push through that line? Again, I believe if Russia come to the conclusion that, hey, we can't maintain this, before there's some complete collapse, we'll sit back and be more a defensive posture, exactly like we saw through basically all of 2023, except for then Wagner. But that doesn't really have that much effect on the MOD itself. Domestic decisions. This is one thing that I do see. This is where authoritarian countries have a slight advantage in being able to make decisions, is having a vertical structure. It is just this guy makes this decision, that then happens. Now, I don't agree with anything authoritarian, but this is why martial law exists. It becomes, for a period of time, more authoritarian, so you have a vertical structure and you can make these decisions and make them far faster. But Russia is making all domestic decisions, where Ukraine makes some domestic decisions, but ultimately has then the US and the Western states who are forcing their hand on many things. I know Kamala or whoever will say, then Ukraine, it will make their own decision, this and that. But they can make the decision at the end point, signing whatever, do we need these shells, need this. But if the US then start withdrawing aid or funding or whatever, you're forcing then their hand. And I do believe too that Russia here is to benefit from what is happening between Israel, Lebanon, Iran, with, of course, the interceptor missiles and, of course, the anti-West like messaging hypocrisy being called out. I think they're to benefit the most from that, and Ukraine doesn't benefit from that because of, well, the air defense missiles are going to go to Israel first before Ukraine. We can see a shortage there. We have seen that Ukraine definitely does have a shortage of air defense missiles. So that is where I will lay it down. But of course, there is disagreements to this, and I encourage you to watch 2 of these videos. So Combat Veteran Reacts, he does this, that no, Russia isn't winning the war of attrition. He breaks down numbers through Wikipedia, I believe, of casualties sustained and the populations as well. Although I question those numbers and the ability, but I do say in that too, you can't use experience, say, from a war like Afghan and the casualty figures reached or per return to service from being wounded into a war like this where it is things like artillery, FABs, drones. The sustainment the injury sustainment in Afghanistan was IED, small arms, where here it can be far, far bloody more hectic than this. And then there's another video I encourage you to watch, which is History Legends, how Russia is winning the battle of attrition in Ukraine, talking about payment increases. He talks about the recruitment that Russia has, also looks at potential one-to-one casualties at best, and the ability for Russia and Ukraine to then sustain those. Now, one thing that History Legends does talk about in this is, well, even at one-to-one, that's not going to go well. But what we are constantly being told, is that Russia has a 10 times artillery firepower advantage on the front line, yet Ukraine is occurring 7 times the losses on then the Russian forces. So just attritional war, I want to talk about a couple of things here that I think are relevant. So Otto von Bismarck said the Russians are slow to saddle up, but ride fast once they do. Of course, we saw this, the best example, in World War II, which is what Iskander Riemann talks about in his great book called Planning for Protraction. Says during the Second World War, Hitler clearly underestimated the Soviet Union's ability to recover, despite incurring severe demographic and territorial losses. And we know how that then ended here too. So I think all of that, I've just laid out how I see it. Go and watch those guys' videos. They put in a lot of effort. But another thing that I think we need to take into account here before we have a look at some strikes which are relevant is that this will be the first winter since we've seen Russia using the FAB glide bombs en masse. Yes, they were present in the end of 2023 through the winter 23-24, but nowhere near as dialed in or en masse that we have seen, nor the new range of the ones that we're seeing hit ZAP currently over the past 2 weeks for the first time. And I do have concern that a stagnant front line with increased ISR capability, the observation due to it being winter, you can see things in the snow, you can see thermals better, that will make these already very devastating weapons even more effect. And that Russia will then be able to hold their infantry and armour in a very defensive posture over this time. They will then refit, rearm, recruit over the winter, potentially mobilise, although I don't think that is likely at this point in time. While that is defensive posture, those FABs, which the Su-34s are currently flying basically unobstructed for the last couple of months, there's been no even claims of downings, while those FABs cause absolute chaos on the front, and the attritional calculation may swing even further the other way depending on what it actually is currently. And furthermore in this, if Russia is able to sit in a more defensive stagnant posture, given the overmatch of the artillery and the FAB, while then refitting to fight, we could see those lines really degraded from the FABs or artillery over the winter period for Russia to actually launch and restart offensives next year. That is assuming that they will die down as well. So that is some things we're going to talk about a little bit more. Now, of course, that S-70 that went down, people are still talking about a lot, but this is what I found very interesting from War Vehicle Tracker. It seems that in the wreck of the S-70, a Russian D-30 SN glide bomb was found, meaning they've managed to make the S-70 carry glide bombs. It could be they tried to actually combat test it and may have assisted with the loss of connection, in his opinion. So this could be the reason it went down. Also, I couldn't see why this glide bomb would affect really the electronics on board, but could be. But if then you can have drones carrying in glide bombs, well, that is going to be even more of a problem. We already know those are causing chaos. We did see UAC, who of course build Russian fighters. They had this like massive lattice drone thing. It looked like a quadcopter, but like fucking huge, that they were claiming could lift. I think they were saying 500 kilograms. It was on their page for a while. They were talking about casualties and this or that, but people also said, well, could it drop one of these large bombs as like a drone dropped munition? So I found that interesting. Potentially we will see more of this. Now, let's have a look at that S-70. Furthermore, that there are pages saying that Russia then struck the crash site with an Iskander missile as well to try and, I guess, get rid of whatever is left there, and or it's going to be a place where a lot of authorities go to. I'm very surprised that didn't happen within minutes of that going down. An important system like that, you'd think within, as soon as you could pinpoint that's where it dropped, if there's important shit there, fucking bombs away on that. Very common that if a vehicle broke down somewhere like even like Afghanistan, there would be things blown up, thermi, like burning radios, things like this. So I'm surprised that didn't actually happen earlier. But again, speaking of Iskanders, now Russian sources have been claiming that there was this cargo ship here. I'll show you where the port is in a second. They're claiming that it was carrying ammunition. And I've also seen claims that some of these, at least civilian flagged ships, are carrying those drone boat Becks as well. Now, this is a strike with an Iskander. Now, what we don't see in this is, which we would think would see if it has ammunition on board, is then massive secondaries, which we then do not see. We saw that ship targeted, I believe, last month as well, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago too. We reported on that. So exactly what is here? Shit, I am really unsure. But again, $1 million missile striking target. I'd like to know how they build up the, okay, this is targetable. This isn't large expense. But again, we're not going to find out. But I'll say that claimed on one side is this is purely just civilian flagged bloody cargo ship. The other side is saying there was ammo on board or the launching of those drone boats. Again, I can't tell you which is which. But if we then have a look at then where the Iskander then landed, we can see on the map, let's just bring this across here, we can see just in here out from Odessa. But what we do see as well is that there is, of course, it's up in here, that there is then a drone in the air watching this. And what we have seen is not only an increase of Russia's ISR capability, say with something like the drones or maybe the S-70, we have also seen a decrease at the same time, I believe, of the air defense capability that Ukraine does have. Whether that means items are being targeted successfully or there is less interceptors having to only hit really high-end targets due to a lack of supply, or some of what we're meant to going, of course, to then refit, rearm Israel stocks at the moment also. So there's definitely that, and I guess all three of those which I've put in, they're not mutually exclusive. It's probably a mixture of all of this. Now let's have a look on the maps. So here's Ukraine, the center. Here's the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22. The purple since 2014. The green and blue within Ukraine's borders, area that Russia has been and being pushed out of. The blue, of course, back into Russian territories, area that Ukraine is occupying back inside Russia on the Kursk offensive. Now, where we have changes on this map today, the only place is then around the Kurkove, Pokrovsk front around here. Now, that Krasnohivka, by this map, has come completely under control by the Russian forces, getting these areas on the northwest, and of course, then further push toward Hernik, and more of Tishkerne coming under control as well, coming more and more to show in line with what other maps are showing, but also up to this train line, which we have spoken about, is a very important area for then Seladove on that flank. So let me get into my maps folder and show you then a couple of bits and pieces. So here we go. So this is Tishkerne right here. We look at Syriac map. Now, he is showing that there is a cross over to the western side. The Russian army took full control of the urban area. Clash with the Ukrainian army are taking place in the western farms. So he's saying that this area has come under control, and a little bit further push out to the south of here too, but nothing too major. But more pushes around here. The front line, as far as movement to Pokrovsk, seems to be really slowed down, but a focus around this Hernik-Kudakove front. And we can see that this is becoming a bit of a salient in here. So let's just have a look right here that we can see with Hernik-Kudakove, we can see where Russia is pushing on some of these fronts. We can see Tashkene and as well in this Ostrivsky that it's said that there's at least presence by the grey zone. Many maps are showing that Russians are there, including Ukrainian ones, that there is about a 10-kilometre deep salient occurring in here, of course, with the Vovcha River, which runs down here as a physical barrier as well. So you're going to be moving out and not out and around. So wait and see what occurs in here over the next coming days and weeks. Now, the other area I want to talk about is down in the south. Of course, there's Otokiv front down to Tokmak, this area of which we know where Ukraine's counteroffensive was, and more talk that Russia is amassing troops here and said that there are some movements in here too. So this is from then the Kyiv Independent. Russian forces are massing for a breakthrough in the direction of Otokiv in Zap Oblast in the coming days. This is from the Southern Defense spokesperson. Coming warning of a Russian push into this oblast. If they achieve a breakthrough, Russia will be able to fire at logistical routes connecting Zap to the east of Ukraine. Russia will try and succeed at any cost to cut off our logistics. Goes back to the point I said about the balls to wall by the end of the year. Ukrainian intelligence shows that Russian forces are amassing personnel and logistics support in the area. In the few days, they'll likely start new offensive operations. So it'd be very interesting to see what offensive operations do occur down in here. Now, I had a circle drawn on this map. Now, when I was in... I had two circles drawn on the map. I'm going to bring this back up. Apologies. Now, when I was in Otokiv, a couple of things struck me. Now, there is a lot of high points coming down this road on the way into Otokiv. There's a lot of high ground, flattens out after it, but up here, there's observation over all of Otokiv and down onto all the flat areas down in here. Hence why we went and stood and filmed there. That is known from drones and satellites and bloody topographical maps that have existed for 1,000 years. Don't call me on OPSEC. But we were also at the hospital in here, and this is in 2022, and one of the doctors at the hospital told us, as I've said here, that from the train line where we went up to be very, very careful because the Russians were within 1 kilometre of that train line with their armour. So let's go from here that he was saying, the doctor on the ground who I was with, oh God, I can get it. Let's just go to there. Was within this territory at the time. So I guess we'll wait and see exactly where the line was sitting maybe at some point, but we'll see if Russia is able to launch more offensives in here, as then there are through Ukrainian media saying that there could be a problem with more offensive actions and, of course, those logistic routes. He expects Russia to deploy small assault groups backed by armoured vehicles. And this is a tactic that was left over by Wagner. And this does actually work. You put your higher-end troops in amongst lower end, you bring up that low-end formation. Again, traditional war is won by having the best low-end formation possible. It is brutal. It is costly, because some of these small assault groups get wiped out 100%. But what I do ask is, people always look, oh, there's another way, the NATO would... I don't see any other way that's possible right now with the defensive works to move bloody anywhere. And there's small teams and then use that as a lever for a larger armoured assault then behind this. And it does seem to be working with the areas taken, but we don't know on the rate of losses either. This was the main axis of Ukraine's southern counteroffensive in 23, which led to the liberation of the settlement of Robotny, but achieved no major breakthrough. Russia intensified its attacks in the south earlier this year, claiming to recapture Robotny. Ukraine has repeatedly denied this claim. Again, like I said, I'll open a beer when that shows. Now, we have seen in the past couple of weeks, in the past week, FABs in Zap for the first time, that these glide bombs have been landing in Zap. I guess that is significant to this. And like I said, Russia wants to make the situation as bad as possible leading into November, to make it look as dire as possible, to swing it onto their side and underwrite a lot of what is being said. Now, there is said to be one offensive that has been successful in here, but this is I've only seen from not pages that I use all the time. Now, across into Kamyansky, across then here, are said to be Russian have got on this other side. Again, I do not know. I typically don't use that map. I found that one on Twitter, but I've seen many, many other accounts actually speaking of that. So grain of salt on that, but it's internet. Grain of salt with bloody everything. And here we have the Vuhledar front. We have Constantinivka as well. So we'll bring up this front, as there's said to be a change in here by Surek map. Russia begun advancing west of Constantinivka along the northern shore of the Suki Yali River, reaching the outskirts of Antonivka. So this is Antonivka in here, we can see this road, Constantinivka, that have made advancement up into these areas here, not being shown as movement across then these maps. Now we're going to go to an area where there is shown as some difference, and we can see we have then the Terny Nevsky front in here. We do know that there are claims that this has closed up between Nevsky and sort of the Terny. We also have other maps that show Makivka to Nevsky in here has closed up as well. There's many claims of that at the moment, particularly this northern one. But in here we do have a Syriac maps change. Let's have a look at this. So this isn't maybe the easiest to see just because we're zoomed in a little bit differently, but we can see that this is then Terny around in here, and Ivanivkia, that there's said to be advancement. If we take where this reservoir is, straight out to then the east of here, filling in these areas between Nevsky and Terny as well. Again, wait and see, map is not showing it, but it is very, very difficult with the maps and what is and is not shown. Now we come up into then the Kursk. I don't really use this map for movement up in here, but let's have a bit of a look. So, of course, this is difficult because we're looking at a lot of red, and the blue in here is difficult to have a look at. But we see this Ubukovka Vesiole front, that it does show the Glushkova district, Ukrainian army recaptured a series of positions southeast of Vesiole. So what Syriac was saying yesterday around Ubukovka Vesiole, that Russians were able to push them out. It looks like Ukraine now have actually gone to direct east as well. Konstantinovka, Russian army captured new positions south of Kalinyov around the top of this area up in here. Now, we have one more update in and around Kursk as well, showing further. Let's have a look down in here. Now, the easiest way is just to look at where then this is lining up. And again, further situation goes front, Glushkova district, you're going to enter the farms of Otterdel. So a further push through those regions in Vesiole as well. So definitely some movement still liquid up in there. But again, how much is it affecting other areas in the front line? That is still the question of which I would ask. Now, let's have a look around the Donetsk-Pokrovsk front. We've spoken a little bit about fortifications throughout this video. Now, Clement Molan, who does a great job on Twitter, has spoken about this. How Ukraine is preparing to defend Pokrovsk. Engineering troops began digging new lines in Pokrovsk, but also, for the first time, on the road to Dnipro. Here is the analysis, including high-res images. So it shows where the Russian forces are and where Pokrovsk is, and these lines, but also that new lines are being built on the way to then Dnipro out here as well. So building then new fortifications. Reading the comments, people are like, well, why are these being built now? He said, then I made a few threads on the situation of Ukrainian defensive lines to understand what was their strategy. So I mapped 4 lines defending Pokrovsk. The situation is still plus minus the same with 3 lines, with the lines, 3 and 4 still holding. So you can see from Avdiivka, these then lines then falling back and the ones that now are still holding. But what it does mean with defensive lines is just because there is a defensive line does not mean that it is effective. What we have seen time and time again from media speaking to soldiers is that these, in some cases, are ill-prepared lines, and there's a lot of complaints from these soldiers that these are not in tactically important areas, that it was built by contractors or people that is in the wrong spot, and they're having to dig them themselves in a different spot because it's not useful, and that some of them are not prepared adequately, which we've seen come through Ukrainian media as well, as I showed you and shared with you a friend of mine who's in and around this area, speaking of, yeah, they're being built by civilians. The problem is these are contractors who may not actually know tactically where this needs to be, but also if things start dropping, civilian contractors are going to then fuck off. So there is questions around, just because it's there, how effective then actually is it? Clement says, this is the reason Ukraine began preparing new defensive positions after Pokrovsk. The new line from the last days is at the border of Donetsk and Dnipro Oblast. It seems it is being dug between Mezhova and Slovyanska, 2 important cities which I highlighted a few weeks ago. So well behind the line, that there are more defensive works being dug. So I guess we will see what exactly then occurs in here. And I believe this line is somewhere right through here. It's actually very hard to find these exact areas, but I believe it's just about here, some say 40 Ks, or am I wrong? Wherever. If there are lines being built a fair way back, preparing for more advancement. Again, what we do know is if some of these areas come under control, the amount of supply into areas like Constantinivka, down into New York, Donetsk, and Chasiv Yar do really, really come under some jeopardy due to the roads leading through here. Anyway, legends, have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.